Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Let's Play, or not Let's Play, Out of the Abyss Notes series for Out of the Abyss, which is the D&D 5e Underdark adventure. We've been plugging away. My intrepid party has been adventuring along for quite some time in this, and we're having a nice time with it. Getting good feedback on this series of YouTube videos from folks. It seems to be helpful to people, and I'm glad to hear that. I always welcome your comments and questions and that sort of thing on YouTube, and I do try to respond to them either in the comment thread or sometimes in the videos. So anyway, when we finished last time, they had finished their Underdark uh, camping trip with the Myconid colony, and they had kind of split, and were now being guided to Blingden Stone by Rasharu, one of the Myconids, um, and Shushar and Glabagul had kept on with the Myconids. So Glabagul is no longer with the party, and Shushar is no longer with the party. So now the only remaining NPC from the beginning of Chapter 1 of Velkenvelv is Eldith, who's just a darn handy NPC to have around. As I've mentioned in several videos, if they get in a pinch, sometimes I'll allow her to get into combat or do survival checks or offer advice or something like that. And then if we've one of my characters or players fully statted her up with full character sheet and everything, and it was a great job. So when if a new player shows up and doesn't have a character for that night, then a lot of times we'll say, hey, play, Eldith. Or if somebody loses their character, um, for the temporarily they'll play Eldith. So just a really handy NPC to have around. Plus, I like the character. I like her, the way we've made her very self-sacrificing and brave and that sort of thing. In fact, she almost died during the escape to Valkenvelv, and that kind of established her character in my mind. But anyway, pressing on. Another thing I want to mention about Globagul is researching Blindenstone, which is where they're headed. Globagul can actually kind of interact with some of that. So I may have Globagul show back up. Um, and I'm trying to determine when do I want to have Globagul show up. As they're heading to Blindenstone, Globagul just kind of shows up and is like, I felt a desire to come here because there's a reason why Globagul would feel that. Or I may have Globagul show up at a very dramatic moment during Blingdenstone. So, but Globagul will probably reappear. Um, so, that being said, where they had gone, they had left the Myconid colony. They were almost at Blingdenstone, and they encountered from chapter 2. And I decided to do this. I thought this was a neat encounter, so I had them encounter the Lost Tomb of Khaem. I guess I'm saying that it's either Khaem or Khaem, Khaem, and it's the tomb of a Netherese noblewoman that they give different reasons to suggest why it may be down there. There could have even been a calamitous earthquake back in the day, and the tomb fell into the Underdark, or there's many reasons why it'd be there, but suffice it to say it's there. And there's a sentient sword uh, that's been there for centuries and telepathically yelled out to the party as they were passing by, said, save me, don't leave me, kind of thing. So they think a ghost talked to them. That kind of the discussion I've heard at the table, and I've allowed that, of course. I mean, players can develop theories, and sometimes the stuff that they suppose makes it a lot more interesting than hints you could have dropped. So, but anyway, yeah, there's a sword that has become sort of terrified of the dark that wants to be rescued, and it is in the tomb of the noblewoman. So I guess Khaem or Khaem. I'm not sure if somebody knows officially how to say that. I may Twitter up Chris Perkins and ask him how to pronounce it. So because he wrote a lot of this book. So they had just found the very entrance to the tomb, and had gone into the area 1, and I described that to them. They had done some research checks or history checks and said, oh, this is because there's friezes and bas reliefs or bas reliefs and dioramas and stuff, and they had determined that this was a Netherese noble's tomb, or it was Netherese. They don't know it's a tome yet, or a tomb, although they suspect that. So, and so it's just a square area, and there's stairs going down. So, some things to understand about this tomb. And another thing I want to say, this encounter is probably going to take probably about 3 hours, maybe, because we play in 2.5 hour chunks at a game store once a week. And I really thought we would be arriving at Blingdenstone. It just say, okay, you're a Blingdenstone, and we'll pick up next week. But they're still in the tomb as at the end of last night, or not last night, but when we played this week. They're almost done, but they still have one more major area, one more major room to investigate. So I would say, because we described the entrance, we spent a few minutes the entrance room the previous session, so that was already out of the way. And then they did some exploring, had a combat, and had just discovered a secret room, and then we had to end. So, and that was a little over 2 hours. Given that I had introduced them to the tomb the week before. So this, plan on a good 2 or 3 hours on this one, depending on how your players do things. So it didn't, because there's only 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only 5 rooms and 2 possible combats to this area, and it just took a little longer than I thought. Not egregiously longer, but a little bit longer. Another thing that's interesting, these doors, every door in the tomb is a 10 by 10 slab that's covered in bronze, like a thin layer of bronze, and then it swivels on a central axis. It doesn't open, they swivel. So that's an interesting feature that I made sure to point out and continually point out. There's no real gameplay impact, but I just thought it was an interesting feature to give the tomb more personality. It's completely dark. Ceilings are 15 feet high, and hallways connecting them are 10 feet high. And each of those swivel doors takes a DC 15 strength to open or close. Now, another really interesting aspect of this tomb, the Fair's Rest, the magic that kind of suffuses the Underdark, is intensely concentrated. It says the tomb was crafted during an age of high magic and has become suffused with Fair's Rest. The ancient chaotic energy now permeating the structure causes any spell cast within the tomb to trigger a roll on the Wild Magic Surge table in Chapter 3, Classes of the Player's Handbook, and I had a lot of fun with that. So don't forget to do the Wild Magic. That was actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this this encounter with the characters. One, I wanted to have a nice little, relatively short side adventure with some like a very short dungeon crawl that had that sentient sword. That they could get, and I thought that would be neat. But then also I loved this idea of this wild magic, and the creature types. There's specters and a wraith in here, and they hadn't fought those yet. So I just thought it was a nice, fun encounter all around to do. Now the tomb itself, there's some exploration. There's some clues that it's ghosts, basically, because they can do some researching that shows that the dust hasn't been disturbed, but there's new damage that's relatively recent. So there's some kind of clues. Now my party didn't cotton on to it. They did do the checks to say, oh, well, some of this destruction is relatively recent. And then they also were able to notice that the dust had not been disturbed, but the best I could tell, that didn't connect. Now, maybe it connected for a player and they didn't mention it, but nobody went, oh, well, no, that's weird. There's one of the first areas you come into. You go into the entrance, and then there's a stairway that goes, it almost kind of winds around. It's not circular, but it kind of has you go down a landing, then you go down, so it's almost like, kind of crisscross, the best I could tell, and it goes down like couple 100 feet, I think, 100 feet, and you go down like 4 landings. So you go down pretty deep, and then you open up into an area that's an old shrine, and the shrine and a lot of stuff in there has been damaged. Now, the shrine is not as important to this area as the players will think. They're like, oh, well, they're wanting to do religion checks and they're wanting to do this and that and the other. The book doesn't really go into a lot. It's just an old shrine and there's some damage here. So that, and but the players, of course, are like, oh, well, and they're trying to connect all this stuff in their heads, which is what players do. But I allow them to do any rolls and checks and ask any questions they wanted, but I tried to be careful not to accidentally give them a red herring or send them down a rabbit hole. Because I don't want to stifle their imagination or their gameplay, but I don't want to accidentally create one of those rabbit holes they go down for 30 minutes and it's really not relevant to the story. But players will do what players will do, so I try not to stifle that. They went into there's what they can. There's two other discoverable rooms after the shrine, and then there's a secret room. Okay, so there's a false tomb that you will initially think is the main internment area of wherever this tomb was created for, but it's actually false. There's a big sarcophagus, and there's in the wall. There's a couple of blocks that have been carved where there's those kind of clay pots that have the organs have been removed, and there's desiccated organs and stuff like that. And the players immediately, without any prompting from me, started thinking, before they even looked in the jars and saw that they were desiccated organs, they're like, oh, Egyptian burial. So they immediately kind of made that kind of connection in their mind because that's what they're already expecting. Because they assume the voice is a ghost saying, come get me out of here. So they immediately, started thinking that. Now, this false tomb area has a couple of interesting things about it. Now, first, one thing on those clay jars, they kept like messing around with them and thinking about them and pondering them. And I said, I said, who's got medicine? And there were a couple of characters that had medicine, so I had them give me rolls, and they were successful enough that I went, you've got this is more organs than one person would have, because the organs are actually of the servants. There's 4 servants that were interred in this tomb as well, and these are the remains or the desiccated organs of these servants. So the actual sarcophagus itself is, if it's disturbed, then a magic mouth spell activates. Now, this magic mouth spell will only activate if the main wraith that is in area 5, that's a hidden area, has not been destroyed. When my characters found this room, the wraith has not been destroyed yet. They haven't encountered it. So the magic mouth spell booms out, and this is just automatic if they disturb the sarcophagus. It says opening the sarcophagus triggers a magic mouth spell, and the sarcophagus lid, by the way, looks really heavy, but it's got a spell on it that makes it a little easier to shift. You only need a DC 10 strength check. Anyway, the magic mouth fires off, and you have disturbed me, and you suffered the curse, and they have to do a DC 15 charisma saving throw, and on a failure, the creature is cursed with disadvantage on all attack rolls and saving throws. The creature can repeat the saving throw after 24 hours have elapsed, and that ends the effect with a successful save. Otherwise, they'll need to remove a curse spell to end the effect. Or if you destroy the wraith, it ends the effect. So the majority of the party became cursed. And I was like, who's in the room? Who's out of the room? All that before they went in. And the majority of the party became cursed. Now, I didn't let them know at that moment that they were cursed. I waited until saving throws and attack rolls started happening, and then I was like, you're disadvantaged, and then finally, okay, well, it's because of that mouth telling us we were cursed. But I didn't go, oh, you're cursed, you're disadvantaged. I let it kind of, the realization of that kind of unfold naturally during gameplay. Now, another thing I want to mention, one thing I think I did wrong in this encounter, or in this whole tomb, was because different, this, if you're in the room you get cursed, and if and there's another room that has sarcophagus. Depending on which sarcophagus you're checking out, you may find a secret, this or that or the other. So I was trying to, like, okay, where's everybody at? And I would ask that multiple times. And then I'd say, okay, now which sarcophagus, and da da da. You know, and when you do that and you're not normally doing that, it kind of tips off the players that something's up. So I want to try to find a better way of, I probably, what I'm going to start doing during dungeon crawls is I'm just going to continually, okay, where is everybody at? Who's in the room? Who's not in the room? Um, what exact, like, well, I'm going to investigate a wall. Well, which wall are you investigating? Um, I'm going to start being more consistent with that. So even when it's not necessarily important, so that way when it is important, it's not a big tip off to the characters that something's up. I felt, and we still had fun. I didn't feel like that I gave away everything by any means. I still think there was some suspense going on, but it was just obvious I was being very um, specific. Like, now who's doing what and where are they standing, and so I think I'm just start being more consistent with that. So the false tomb, they open up the sarcophagus, and there's a statue of the lady in there, not her body. And I said, look, it's not one of those things where the body's underneath there and it's covered sort of in a lid, but it's a statue. And the statue has been glued in there with a spell called Sovereign Glue. So it's not going anywhere. Can't be moved. I guess they could do a spell magic or something like that, but it's not going anywhere. Um, and just as a reminder of how players think, one of my players went, oh, is it missing its feet? Because if you remember in the tomb where they found Globagul, there was a room that had a fountain in it. And on top of that, there was a pedestal, and there were just a couple of feet left of a statue. And they kind of rabbit holed on that for a little while, thinking, well, we need to find a statue and put it back on there. And it was just a descriptive detail. But that descriptive detail got into that player's mind. So now the next time that he hears statue, he's like, was it missing its feet? Because he's wanting to grab it and run it back and take it, put it on that, even though story-wise, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. But it could, and that's not bad thinking on the player's part. So, just a reminder of the, sometimes a passing detail will really fixate for a player, or a player will fixate on it. So, uh, so the other thing they did, they were they were the same player that was like curious about the statue. Um, what started taking the clay pots and dumping the organs inside the tomb, or the sarcophagus, after it was opened up and there were the statues. Started dumping organs in there, trying to get something to trigger. Um, and that's when I started asking for medicine checks. It's a very gentle way to imply that that's really not going to do anything without stifling, their imagination. Um, so anyway, yeah. So I did have, when the big booming voice was like, no, 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 my player with, well, I have two players with Arcane. One of them was missing the last couple of weeks. And so the other player with Arcane, who's a Arcane Trickster, who's a rogue, but the Arcane Trickster kind of rogue, has Arcane and was able to determine, oh, that was a magic mouth spell. So when found out it was a magic mouth spell, they're like, oh, okay, well, no worries. They're thinking they're really not under a curse, just because it was just a magic mouth spell. But in reality, they really did fall under a curse. So the other thing is, the other room they went into was the servants' quarters, or the servants' internment area. Uh, and there's four sarcophagi, at one at each corner. So like northeast, southwest, southeast, northwest, da da da. And the minute one is disturbed, four specters come raising up out, and they howl with fury and attack the party. And it goes on to say that the specters will chase the party beyond the tomb. So if the party flees, now mine didn't, they stood and fought. I imagine yours will. But on the off chance that somebody flees, the specters will chase them beyond the confines of the tomb. So, opening one of the sarcophagus lids requires a DC 17 strength check, and each sarcophagus has different treasure inside of it. And one sarcophagus has a secret entrance that goes down that leads to the real tomb where the wraith is and the sword, which my party did not get to this time. They had just discovered the secret entrance, secret door, or whatever when we had to wrap. So on the specters, just keep in mind that any spells that are thrown in this entire tomb trigger wild magic. We had some very interesting wild magic. We had one, and I mean I included cantrips. Anything that's a spell triggers wild magic. We had people accidentally throwing mirror image. We had one person, their hair fell out, and it says it falls out for 24 hours. And then also they lost the ability to speak. Anytime they spoke, little pink bubbles came out. So, for the duration of this, anytime, I think it was for a minute, 10 minutes, something like that. But, they lost their ability to cast spells that require a verbal component while that was going on. Had somebody else became blindingly radiant, and anybody within 5 feet of them at the end of their turn could possibly get blinded. So they went and ran off in a corner and fought, so they weren't blinding anybody. Had a lot of really cool wild magic effects, including once the battle was over, the cleric was like, okay, I'm going to heal this person. I cast whatever, and I said, that's a spell? Yep. So we had another wild magic effect that caused confusion and had the potential to have other party members attacking other party members. But fortunately, everybody, either the 3 people that fell under the confusion, one of the rolls, they just stood there like, and the other 2, they weren't affected. So they came out fortunate on that. But anyway, yeah, the specters are nasty. That if they hit, they do necrotic damage, and they have a potential to lower somebody's hit point total. And if a specter lowers the hit point total to 0, it's an automatic death on that character with you don't get those 3 death saving throws. So let me look that up. But it could potentially be very, very nasty. So these specters, even though they're only CR1, they potentially can jack somebody up. And in fact, one person got their hit point total lowered. Another character got critted by a specter, and he took like 30 points in one hit. It was nasty, and fortunately they passed their saving throws, so they didn't get their hit point maximum lowered. But these specters are not as slouchy, I guess, as a CR1 would indicate. I think the CR is a bit off on these specters. But yeah, it says life drain. Melee spell attack, +4 to hit, reach 5 feet, one character or one creature, hit, 3d6 necrotic damage, average of 10. The target must succeed on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw, or its hit point maximum is reduced by amount equal to the damage taken. This reduction lasts until the creature finishes a long rest. The target dies if this effect reduces its hit point maximum to 0. Yikes! So if a specter takes somebody to 0, they're not automatically dead. But if they fail their saving throw and that lowers the hit point maximum to 0, they're dead. Just dead. No saving throws. No 3. You're laying there waiting to be stabilized. So keep that in mind. It was a good fight with these specters. It was actually a tougher fight than I was expecting. And 2 or 3 of my players took some pretty good licks. So the other thing is, each sarcophagus has different treasure in it. None of the treasure is magical, but it's very well described. So my players are kind of assuming that some of it's magical. Like there's this cane that has a scorpion thing on the end, and they're like, oh, it's probably magical. It's not magical. It's just nice looking. So they get some I think some actual money. Gold pieces, silver necklaces. No, it's just all bracelets, a non-magical wand, a cane, some other stuff like that. And it's all, there's no actual coins. It's just the stuff that's worth gold pieces. So, and each sarcophagus has a different treasure in it. So that's worth keeping in mind. And then the northeast sarcophagus, uh, just keep in mind that it has a door going down. Now, one thing that I kind of struggled with on this room was I want to make sure that they find that secret door going down, but you need a DC. You have to be doing a perception check on that specific sarcophagus, and it's DC 15 or better to notice that it's on rollers, uh, hidden stone rollers that it rolls aside, and then there's this little square entrance going down. Uh, and if you leave, the voice, the way it's written, the voice doesn't say, "Hey, where are you going?" So the only way that the voice will pipe up again, as it's written, is if you find the secret entrance and then leave. Then the voice will say, "Hey, don't leave." But if you could search, 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 not find anything and leave and never find the tomb. So I think since you have to specifically do a DC 15 perception check on that one sarcophagus in order to find it, I think that I might lower that difficulty check to find it to a 10 or something like that. Um, or have the voice, if you leave the tomb without, okay, where are you going? And so that way that'll encourage them to keep looking for secret stuff. Because as it's written, uh, they could very easily search the whole known visible part of the tomb, never find anything, and just leave. So now most players will understand, hey, I don't think we found the big boss yet, but I mean that potentially could happen. And you don't want to railroad your players to force them to do stuff. So, I and in this tomb I was like, okay, which sarcophagus, which sarcophagus, which sarcophagus, which sarcophagus, and I think that tipped them off that something's up. And they did eventually. One of my characters climbed inside the sarcophagus and did a perception check and did well enough that I said, okay, you noticed that when you got in there, it seemed like it moved a little bit, and that was enough to okay. And then they found that it rolled on hidden rollers. So um, that's pretty much this week. Next week, I'm sure we'll finish off the tomb. There will be the Wrath of the Wraith, and then they'll get to Blingden Stone. So looking forward to that. Thanks so much for watching the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. Appreciate if you leave a thumbs up on this video. If you share it, I'd love if people shared this channel. Um, word of mouth is huge. Leaving comments and thumbs up on the video is huge. Really appreciate it. And if you would consider leaving leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel, that helps out a lot too. So, but regardless, I really appreciate you watching, and I welcome your comments and your feedback. And we will catch you next time on Shane Plays. Thanks.